This morning's Bible reading is coming from Romans 1:18 through 20. Romans 1:18 through 20. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppresses the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For the invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, and these things that have been made, so they are without excuse.
Good morning. It is good to see all of you here this morning, especially excited for the visitors that we have with us today. It's always a blessing to have visitors with us, and some people with us who aren't visitors, we just don't get to see them as much as we used to. So glad to have you all with us today as well. It's the first Sunday of the month, and so as I hope we're catching on at this point, first Sunday of the month means that it is Fundamental Sunday. When we think about the word fundamental, I don't know that I've actually taken the time as we've been going through Fundamental Sundays to define it, and so I want to do that just very quickly. The idea of something being fundamental is serving as a basis supporting existence or determining essential structure or function. Or you might say it this way: something is fundamental when it is essential to other things existing, functioning, or having structure. So for instance, your biological parents are fundamental to your existence. If your biological parents had not existed, then you would not have existed. Basic addition and subtraction are fundamental to the higher areas of mathematics like algebra, geometry, physics, calculus. And you have to have the basics there of just adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing in order to do the higher levels of mathematics. And so those things are what we might call fundamentals. I am I'm a sports fan, as y'all know. I am especially a football fan. Football is my favorite sport to watch. One of the things I hear over and over again right now, it's spring camp for a lot of football teams, right? So I've been listening to the commentators and stuff, like you give insights or nuggets to things that are happening in Alabama's spring practice right now. Well, every year I hear the same things, which is that, we're spending a lot of time working on our fundamentals, on our technique. And so there are essential things that you have to do. You might consider them small things or simple, but the players need to know how to do these two things in order to do the grander scheme of their job on the field, right? And so that's the idea of something being fundamental. Now, when it comes to the Christian faith, there is no basic fact that is more fundamental than the existence of God. All right, if we go to the very beginning of Scripture and we look at Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1, we think about in the beginning, God. In the beginning, God created. If there is no God, then everything that happens from Genesis 1 to the end of Revelation becomes null and void. If God was not there in the beginning, if he did not exist, and if he does not exist, then everything else, well, it doesn't matter. If God did not exist, the Bible it's just a waste of ink and paper. If God is not real, Jesus was either a liar or a lunatic. If God does not exist, the cross was just another criminal Jew being put to death. If God does not exist, then the resurrection is a hoax. And if God does not exist, then our being here today is a pointless endeavor. And there's no reason for it at all. So it is really the most fundamental truth. And so we got to address the question, does God exist? Now, I'm going to make the assumption that all of us here believe in the existence of God, and that is why you are here present this morning. And so you may be saying, I've already come to my conclusion on this, and I'm happy that you did, but I hope you'll bear with me and we can be reminded of maybe some reasons as we move forward that it is logical to hold that belief. In Hebrews chapter 11, I remind you at the beginning of the chapter, faith is defined as the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction, or some translations, the evidence of things not seen. Right? Later in verse 6 of the same chapter, it will define faith. It says, without faith it is impossible to please him, that is God, and having that faith must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who diligently seek him. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 6. The belief starts with the idea that he exists. That's where faith begins. Do you have faith in God that is based on evidence this morning? Have you searched out the matter and came to the conclusion that God exists? Or maybe for some of us, we have always been told by family and friends that God exists, and so we never really questioned it. That's just what our family believes, that we've gone to church, we've always believed that God exists. Some people, perhaps you've had some type of experience in your life that left you with no doubt that God exists. You look back on it and you said, I can't explain how these things would have come together if it wasn't for a God working in my life. But maybe you are here, and I think a lot of people, if we're being honest, will say this. Maybe you are here and you have even if you were brought up in the church, maybe you have dared to wonder and ask the question within your mind, is it true? I've always believed, I grew up going to church. I still go to church. I worship him all the time. I'm a Christian. I obey the gospel. And I had faith. But sometimes you wonder, is it true? Does he really exist? Because there are a lot of voices out there who are saying that it's not true. That are saying he doesn't. A lot of people who appear to be very intelligent people who are claiming that it's not true. And so what I want us to do this morning is simply to think about a few arguments for the existence of God. Now, let me give a couple of prefaces here. I am not a professional apologist, so to speak, okay? So there are many more people way more qualified to give this lesson than I, but I'm here and you pay me as the preacher, so you got to listen to me for the next few minutes, all right? So you'll deal with what we got to say, and hopefully I won't do a terrible job, and if I do, maybe somebody can clean it up for us later. The second thing I will say is this sermon does not follow my normal format, so y'all become accustomed to how I normally preach. I'll have a main text. We'll go to whatever that passage is, and then we will draw our points from that text, expository style, so to speak, right? This sermon is not like that. We're going to take a different approach, and so bear with me. We're obviously going to have Scripture woven into it, but it will be maybe a little more logical in approach, let's say. And so we're going to think about some of these apologetic ideas, the arguments for the existence of God. Now, there are a lot of arguments for the existence of God. I'm only going to give you 3 this morning because I don't have time to do any more than that. And so it's possible I won't even cover what is to you the strongest argument. So there may be an argument that you know of or that you have that is better than the ones I will present. But these are maybe the most common ones and the ones that to me are the easiest to grasp and the most powerful when it comes to thinking about the reality of God's existence. And hopefully when we leave here, you'll at least have a general understanding of these 3. And so the 3 arguments are the teleological argument, or if it helps you, the design argument. I forget the long names of them, but I can remember design, right? So the teleological argument or the design argument for God's existence. The cosmological, or the cause and effect, or sometimes called the first cause argument. And then the last one, my personal favorite, is the moral argument for the existence of God. So we're going to try and talk about all 3 of these this morning, and hopefully I won't take up too much of your time. We'll get out of here at a reasonable moment. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 20. Now, this is what Caleb has just read for us. I wanted to look at it again, and it talks about those who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and his divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. And so those who reject the reality of God, or they live as though he does not exist, do so not because they can't know, and not because that there is not evidence to suggest to them that there is a God to worship and to obey, to follow, but they do it because they are suppressing truth. because they are actually rejecting what God has shown to them. It says that God is plain to them. He has shown it. He's not hidden. He hasn't kept any secrets that keeps us from being able to know if he exists or not. He has given us evidence to know. And so, how has God shown it? Specifically, in the things that have been made. In other words, in creation. And that leads us to the first of those arguments, which is the design argument or teleological argument. And so how this is going to work, let me see if I've got it up here. Yes. Break it down into premises. And so this is how a lot of philosophical arguments will break down. You'll have a premise 1 and a premise 2 and then a conclusion. And so premise 1 will look like this. It says, proof of intelligent design necessitates an intelligent designer. Right? And so makes a statement something that is true. I think all of us would agree with that first statement. If something indicates intelligent design, it means that it needs to have an intelligent designer. Second thing is that the universe presents evidence of intelligent design. So this is how the premises work. It'll state something that is obviously true in the first one. And the second one will state something that, if it is true, when you combine it with the first premise, you get an obvious conclusion. Right? So look at all these things together. Premise 1, proof of intelligent design necessitates an intelligent designer. Premise 2, the universe presents evidence of intelligent design. Conclusion, the universe must have an intelligent designer. Now really the question here, the only thing there's a question about is premise 2. Right? We need to establish, is premise 2 reliable? Does the universe actually present evidence to us of intelligent design? Let's think about premise 1 for just a second, and then we'll get to the evidence on premise 2. If you were the first human being, for instance, to travel to Mars, I don't know, maybe Elon is trying to get us there, maybe he's working on that, but say he succeeds and you're the first person who travels to Mars. You get to Mars, when you get there, what you find is a fully formed city. Already there, already built. It's got roads, it's got highways, there's electricity. What would you conclude? Would you think, well, this is amazing. Mars, when it happened, when it just naturally happens to have a sophisticated city on its, no, you wouldn't think that. What you would think is that I'm not the first intelligent being to make it to this planet. Somebody beat me here. Whether it was a human being, whether it was some other creature, I don't know. But your first thought would not be, Mars just happens to have a fully formed city on it. You would think another intelligent being has been here. The city demands intelligent design. So your obvious thought is, there must have been a designer. Somebody must have been here to design and to build this city. And so, premise 2, when we lead it to that, we ask this question, does the universe present evidence of intelligent design? There are a lot of great examples of the intelligent design of our universe, and I could not give them all to you, but one of my favorites is the idea of the way that your body clots blood. It's really fascinating thing to think about, and so I'm going to read something to you. I'm reading this from a book called Case for a Creator, written by Lee Strobel. This is in chapter 8 of that book, and that he lays out this idea. And so I just want to kind of reiterate to you what he writes there. If I were up here in the course of this lesson, to open my Bible, to grab a piece of paper and get a paper cut, the complexity and precision of the system that would have to jump into action to keep me alive is incredible. I mean, it's fascinating. So, for instance, if your body clotted in the wrong place, say your brain or your lungs, you would die. If your body waited until all the blood had drained from your body, from it, and then it tried to form the clot, guess what? You would also die. If your body did not limit the blood clot to the cut area, then too much of your blood system could clot, and you would die. If your body did not make a clot that covered the entire cut, you would still lose too much blood, and you would die. See, the precision of things that have to jump into action to get it precisely right to keep you from bleeding out from something as simple as, say, a paper cut is incredible. It's remarkable. And he asks the question, how could that be? How could it perfectly be balanced, that it does it just right, that it clots just the right amount in the right place to keep us from dying when we nick ourselves on a piece of paper? Well, the answer to that is it's not an accident. It could not be an accident. If it were, living beings would have never survived. They would have died out very early on from minor cuts and bruises. You see, the human body necessitates the idea of intelligent design. I think about Psalm 139 and verse 4. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Fearfully and wonderfully made. It's an impressive design. Does the world supply evidence of complex design? I think it is undeniable. It obviously does, and so that leads us to the conclusion that the universe must have an intelligent designer. Now, the second argument is the cosmological or the cause and effect argument. The first premise is this: everything that begins to exist has a cause. It's also called the law of causality. The house that you live in, how did it get there? Did it just happen to be there? Did it have, it had a designer, an architect, a builder. In other words, we might say these things, we talked about this with design, but let's think about it this way. It had a cause or causes. Somebody caused it to happen. Somebody initiated the process. Somebody somewhere decided there needs to be a house built right here. You know, whether that was you and you decided to build your house, whether a housing company decided to build a house, somebody caused this to happen. Anything that you see around you, it has a beginning or it came into existence. If I think about this church building, something caused it to be built. I think about the pews, something caused it to be built. If I think about us, we had a cause. Something caused us to come into existence. In fact, there is nothing that you look around you and you ask, anything that you see, that you can say it didn't have a cause. I can look at something as simple as a tree and ask, how did a tree get there? It got there because at some point a seed or a sapling was planted in the ground where it happens to be. There was a cause behind it. There's nothing in nature that defies the law of causality, or the idea that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Interesting thought on this. Have you noticed that many of the people who don't believe in God do not present the universe as being eternal? I'm not saying that there aren't any who do, but the majority of them will indicate, even if they don't believe in God, will indicate that the universe had a beginning, that it's not eternal. They might put a date of billions of years old on it, but they'll say it had to begin at some point. I think part of the reality behind that is we recognize, whether we want to admit it or not, when we look at things around us, that everything in nature had a beginning, that it started somewhere. That's maybe one of the reasons that, have the Big Bang that has been pushed to the forefront as a major opinion of the scientific community for many years. The idea is that the universe had to begin at some point. Since we know of nothing in the natural world that is eternal, and since everything had a point of origin, what is the best explanation for the cause of the universe? If everything in the natural world had a beginning, had an origin, what is the best explanation for the cause of the universe? Wouldn't it make the most sense for a thing that had no beginning to not be natural, but to be supernatural, that exists outside of the natural world? In fact, according to the law of causality, that thing, or he, we will call him, since it's God, he had to be supernatural. And so you have premise 2, the universe began to exist. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. And that, of course, leads us to the conclusion that the universe must have had a supernatural first cause. I'll remind you of Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 4. Every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Let's go back to our passage here in Romans chapter 1 for just a minute. And then we'll jump over to chapter 2. It says that who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth, for what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. And so, we see how right Paul was. The design of the universe merits a designer. It's plain in what has been made. The universe merits a first cause because it exists. And so you might say it this way. I think this is the simplest way to put it. Creation merits a creator. Then we go and we think about the moral argument. And we'll start in Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 2 says, "For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them." Romans chapter 2, verses 14 through 15. And so what the Holy Spirit does is he inspires Paul to write that Gentiles that did not have the law of Moses had a sort of natural law within themselves, a law that was written on their hearts, a law that is also called their conscience, that bears witness. What is this law? We might call it morality. And I think it is this law that Paul is referring to that leads us to the argument that I believe, to me, is the hardest to get around if you want to argue against the existence of God. Premise 1. If God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. Most of us here believe that the standard of morality that we have in this world comes from the good and the just God that created the world. That's the opinion of the people in this room. But what if we removed God from the equation? Just imagine for a minute, what if God did not exist? What if there was no good and just God to tell us what is right and what is wrong, to give us a standard of morality? Could things like atheism or naturalism account for a universal standard of morality? I don't think so. You know, for instance, skeptics will suggest that we come from things like primordial slime, rocks, reptiles, other animals. But when we look at those things, we don't speak of morality applying to any of them. I don't know if you are a fan of like National Geographic or Discovery or one of the nature channels, but if you watch those things, the animals there, they don't always behave in ways that I would consider moral. But I don't look at them and say, well, they did something wrong. See, I don't apply morality to them. But in the skeptic's eyes, I came from those things, so why does morality then apply to me? And see, the logic doesn't hold. In fact, many atheists will recognize and admit this dilemma. I want to give to you a quote here. Sorry if the font is not very big, but it was a large quote. This is a quote by Richard Dawkins, but I found the quote in Eric Lyon's article called "The Moral Argument for the Existence of God." So, secondary source, not the first one, but the first one is originally Richard Dawkins. He says this. Richard Dawkins, if you don't know, is one of the most well-renowned atheists for many years in the world. He says, "So long as DNA is passed on, it does not matter who or what gets hurt in the process. Genes don't care about suffering because they don't care about anything. DNA neither cares nor knows. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, and no evil and no good, nothing but pitiless indifference." Richard Dawkins. In other words, he says, if it is the case that there is no God, which he believes, and if all that is operating, all that is controlling us is survival of the fittest, genes that need to be passed on, DNA needs to be passed on to the next generation so that evolution can continue, then there is no morality. It doesn't matter if somebody gets hurt in the process. It doesn't matter about right and wrong. All that matters is the continual process of evolution, natural selection, and survival of the fittest. And yet, I think most of us would say that that is not the case. We would say, for instance, premise 2, that objective moral values do exist. And I think that is very clear. I think we have a sense within us that certain things are unarguably wrong. Things like murder or rape or even racism. We have a sense within us that those things are actually wrong, and we can't shake that reality. I think premise 2 here is particularly strong because even those who might try to deny it still live by it. I want you to imagine, for example, someone who would maybe take the argument or the stance that objective moral values do not exist. They don't exist. You know, moral values, maybe they only come from our culture. Our culture teaches us what is right and wrong, and that's why we think it is that way. Or maybe it's biology that has infused it within us. We've already addressed that a little bit. Here's the problem with that. Let a person take that stance, and then let one of their family members be killed, and the murderer goes free. What is the person going to say? They're going to say that justice was not served. But justice? Where did justice come from? I thought there was no such thing as objective moral values, and yet they're going to demand that justice should be served. Or let them strike a business deal, sign a contract with somebody, and then a person doesn't uphold their end of the contract and pay them the money that they are owed. What are they going to say? They're going to say that they were wronged. That person did, but objective moral values I thought didn't exist. That would mean there is no real right or wrong. You see, that's not the case, and we all know it. And here's the problem with culture. What if my culture tells me that it's wrong to kill an innocent child, and another culture, such as ones who read in the Bible, tell me that I should offer my child as a human sacrifice to the god Molech? Whose culture is right? If moral values come from culture, whose culture do I trust? See, all of us have a sense within us. We know which one is right. We know that it's wrong to kill an innocent child. What if my culture tells me that it's okay to abort millions of children? Does that make it right? No, it doesn't make it right. See, there's a reality there. There's a real standard of objective moral values. They truly do exist. One of the most powerful examples of this that I have heard was given by a man who, I don't know if he was a member of the Lord's church. I don't believe that he was, but he traveled around and gave speeches on apologetics. And he told a story of how he was giving a speech, and when it was over, he did some question and answers. And someone stood up and decided to object to the fact that objective moral values exist. He said, I don't believe in a God. I don't believe there's such thing as objective moral values. I think it's all subjective. I think it's based on culture and things like that. And he said, okay, I want you to imagine if I brought a child onto the stage and I killed the child in front of everybody. What would you say? And the guy thought about it, and he said, I wouldn't like it, but I couldn't say that it was wrong. You see the problem with the logic? He gave himself away in it. If it's not wrong, why did he say, I wouldn't like it? It's because he actually knows that it is wrong in his heart of hearts. You see, there is a real standard of morality that exists. And I believe that it doesn't matter who says it is okay or not okay to kill innocent life. I still believe it is wrong to kill innocent life because it is an objective moral value. Paul said that this moral law was written on the hearts of man. Romans chapter 2. Who wrote it there? God wrote it there. We might say it this way: if objective moral values exist, then God exists, or moral laws necessitate a moral law giver. Again, Hebrews 11:1, faith, the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction or evidence of things not seen. I hope you understand now why the Hebrew writer gave this definition of faith. We are not called to have faith in God without reason, but because of reason. Because it is actually the most logical point to have. In Psalm chapter 14, verse 1, and it repeats this later in the book of Psalms as well, says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." You know, the psalmist, he doesn't write this to be mean. I don't think he's trying to insult somebody. I think what he is saying is that if you want to actually hold within your heart that God does not exist, it's truly a foolish standpoint to have. It's illogical. It's irrational to believe that. The evidence is too strong to the contrary to hold that God does not exist. And so, break it down very, very quickly. All right? Teleological design. Design needs a designer. Cosmological. A beginning needs a first cause. And then the moral law. Morality needs a moral law giver. I want to say to close this lesson that there is a God who created you, a God who designed you, and a God who one day will judge you based on His standard, on His law. But He also died and rose in order to be your Savior. And that is the real God that we serve. There's more than enough evidence today to place your faith in Him. So if there's someone here who has not done that, if you need to learn more about how to obey this God, how to serve Him, we'd love to help you with that. Maybe you say, I believed in God for years, but I haven't been living like I believe in Him. We have an opportunity today to make your life right with Him. If you need to do so, why don't you come while we stand and sing.